Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of HSP TV. I am your host, Barbara, and today I am joined by the beautiful Kat Schwarz. And we are going to be talking about you are not broken or crazy, you're traumatized, and you're gifted. And I've been looking forward to this conversation because this was my reality when I didn't know anything about myself. I seriously thought that there was something wrong with me, that I was broken and that I needed to be fixed. And there were also many, many moments where I felt like I was going crazy and I didn't know what was going on. And I think, based off all the clients that I've helped, this is something that many of us experience. So thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about it today.
Thank you for having me, Barbara. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, why this topic?
Because I think, like you said, it's such a universal experience for those of us who are empaths and really experience that when it's not validated by the medical system or the people around us. You can very easily come to the conclusion that there's something seriously wrong with you. And that for me came in really two messages. Number one was my father. I literally would hear from my father all the time, "What's the matter with you? What's the matter with you? What's the matter with you?" It was this thing that he would say on repeat, and it came from his own anxiety, and it came from whenever his anxiety was tripped up by the fact that something, whether it was I slept late or I didn't get a good, the grade he wanted me to get on a test, or really, even if I tripped and fell and hurt myself, it was like, "What's the matter with you?" And I don't think we realize the cumulative effect of the things that are said to us when we're young and how they really do become our mind chatter, right? The things that we're thinking, that I call it the itty bitty shitty committee in our head. is is not you. It's not the real you. It's the voice of your conditioning, right? It's the voice of your caregivers and your bullies and the people who've criticized you, right? And you take that voice on as your own, but in reality, it's not your voice and it's not your truth, right? You are inherently worthy. You are inherently good enough, right? You are inherently loved. That's the truth. So when we don't think thoughts in alignment with truth, that's where negative emotion comes from. Right. So that was one aspect in which that was spoon fed to me, that there was something wrong with me. And then the other was that I am an empath, meaning that I can feel not only my own energies and emotions quite intensely, but I feel the energies and emotions of the people and environments around me quite intensely. And before I knew that was real and how to protect against that, that felt incredibly overwhelming to experience, right? It was just this constant feeling of not just that shitty committee in my head, but also this real visceral feeling of overstimulation and overwhelm and exhaustion and, just genuinely feeling that there was something wrong with me and that I was crazy, right? Like that I was broken and crazy. And for me, that culminated in a suicidal crisis when I was 38 years old. So it definitely took a crisis point for me to question these beliefs that I had held as truth for, at that point, 38 years.
Yes, I recognize all of the things that you're saying, and they're very important. So I always ask my clients, if you really listen to that voice in your head that's saying that you're not enough, or that you cannot do this, or that you really need to lose weight, is it your voice, or is it the voice of your mom, or the voice of your dad, or a grandparent, or a teacher? And we grow up with these things, and we think it's normal. We hear this constant. I call that the rules, the bullshit rules of life. You should behave like this, or don't show that, or good girls sit with their legs closed and don't have their legs open, or things like that. And the more we hear these types of things, or you are ugly, or you are fat, or you are I love your brother more, I love your sister more, all of these things, they have a huge impact on us in our lives. And they are said so easily by caregivers, by teachers, by adults actually in your life, and they don't seem to realize the huge amount of impact it has on any child, let alone an empath or a highly sensitive child, because what you already shared is we feel very deeply. I'm also an empath. I am a highly sensitive person as well, and for me, it was not just that I was overwhelmed very easily, because we literally feel more, hear more, see more, smell more, taste more in the same situations than any other person. But it was also that I didn't know that I could feel feels that were not my own. I
Right.
always assumed that whatever I was feeling was mine because I'm feeling it. And for empaths and highly sensitive people, this is not true. We can feel things that are from other people, and they don't even have to be in the same room with you to be able to feel them. Energies, emotions, things like that, as if they are our own. So what happened with me was I am naturally bubbly and happy and quite energetic. And then from one moment to the next, I could go from happy and energetic to sad and deeply depressed. And it reached a point where people told me that I had borderline personality disorder, which was definitely not true. But that's when you go from one emotion to the other and back in like that. But we can do that as well when we are influenced by someone else who is feeling these emotions. And it wasn't until I ended up in my burnout in the beginning of my 30s that I learned that you can feel other people's feels and that it feels as your own feels. And this explained so much about myself to myself that I didn't understand. There were so many large parts of myself that I didn't understand, including this. And people would ask me, why are you crying? I don't know. Did
Well,
somebody call you a name? No. Did somebody bully you? No. Did someone hurt you? No. Then why are you crying? I don't know. I never knew. And now I know I was crying because it was not my grief. They were not my tears. Looking back, they were my mom's.
yes. Yeah. And I have a very visceral example of this. And similar to your story, I was told I was bipolar before before I understood this about myself, again, because of that very dramatic change in emotion. Right. But how I experienced this, where I really knew that the emotion wasn't mine, was after my spiritual awakening, which was in 2018. About a year later, I turned 40, and I had met with my medium, and he had said that I was going to a retreat, a yoga retreat down in Tulum, Mexico for my 40th birthday. That was my big present to myself. And 8 weeks prior to the trip, the medium that I had come to know and trust, he said, I see you're going to go on a spiritual trip. There's going to be a ceremony, and it's very important that you attend that ceremony because it's going to be very important to your spiritual development. So several weeks later, the yoga itinerary was released, and on the first day we were told that we were going to do a sweat lodge ceremony, which, even though it is very intense and I wouldn't typically have done it, because I had received that information from my medium that this was a really important thing that I do, I felt nothing but excitement, right? So going into this experience, my predominant emotion was excitement. And yet, as we were heading towards the ceremony building, a woman that I was walking with admitted to me, even though she looked calm on the surface, she told me that she felt very scared, that she was very claustrophobic, and she didn't feel like she could do this or that she wanted to do this. And she was hoping that if the intensity got too much, that they would let her leave. So, I was aware that that was her feeling state. Again, my feeling state was excitement. And now we start the ceremony, and we're all standing around in a circle, and the shaman starts the ceremony, and the woman that had spoken to me asks him, right before he starts, so if it gets too intense for us, can we leave? And he said no. And I burst into tears. I
Mhm.
was the one that burst into tears. She stayed completely calm. I started hysterically crying. And I knew in that moment that the emotion I was feeling and expressing was not my own, but it was so visceral. I couldn't help it. Right? It's a really interesting, and I've even heard it described as a separate Claire. I've heard it described as Claire empathy. And I would argue that there's a reason for that, because it is a very real thing that empaths experience. And when that's not validated as true, you literally feel crazy, right? Like you don't know why
Yes.
you're crying. You don't know why you feel the way you feel.
No, and that is, I think, the biggest deciding factor. And so, whenever I'm feeling something, I always ask myself, is it mine or is it somebody else's? And if it's mine, then I know what it has to do with, or what caused it, or you know why you're feeling this way. On some level, you always know at least something. And when you have absolutely no idea why you're feeling something, then I ask myself, is it then somebody else's? And then you feel this inner calmness descend over you and think, oh God, it's not mine. Oh, and that's very liberating, very freeing, because if it's not yours, then you don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to solve it. You don't have to find the origins. You don't have to do anything. You can just think, oh, it's not mine. Then I'm letting it go. And I will trust that if this person who is feeling this needs me, that they will reach out and share it and ask for my help or something. And it's also something I often get asked, well, what do I then do with this feeling? If it's not yours, nothing. You just let it go and you trust that if you need to do something with it, that person will find you. And these things, knowing these things, made a huge difference in my life.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you find that you can protect against that?
Yes, I do find that I can protect against it, and I also find that for some people it's even more difficult, because what I said before, it's not just people that you are in the same room with. I had it happen even with one of my good friends. All of a sudden, I felt like, oh, I need to reach out to you because something's going on with you, and it's not good. And he was in a completely different country and not even close by, different time zone, and I really just felt, oh, I need to call you. So I called him and he said, oh, it's such a coincidence that you're calling me, because I'm really not doing well and I could really use someone to talk to. And I thought, well, here I am, right? And I felt it within the depths of who I am, that something was up and then I needed to do something. And that's part of the answer that your question deserves, is that when I am in a workshop, or when I go to the movies, or I go grocery shopping, or something where lots of people are going to be, I can put up protection for myself. There are many different protection forms that you can use. I always teach my clients every single one that I know, so that they can find the one that works for them, because what works for me doesn't have to work for you. But there are things you can do to protect yourself from taking over this energy, basic things that I do every single morning that are part of my morning routine. But still, even when I do things like that, when it's someone I love,
Mm.
like
Yeah.
this friend or someone that I have a particularly strong connection with, then it can still break through the protection if it needs my attention or my help in that moment.
Yeah. And I think that's part of the superpower of it, right? Because it can really feel like a curse, when before you understand it and before you have ways to protect against it, it can definitely feel like a curse. But in actuality, it's our superpower, right? Our sensitivity and our strong intuition, are just knowing, as you said, in the depths of your soul, something that you don't know how you know it, you just know it, right? That is a gift, it's a divine gift, but with great power comes great responsibility, as the saying goes, right?
Yes, and also a steep learning curve, to be honest, because when you don't know any about this, it feels like you're one of those balls in a pinball machine. ding, 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 ding,
Right.
ding, 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 you know, and you feel
Exactly.
like you don't have any control, and that you're just a victim or of circumstances, or a victim of emotions, or whomever's closest to you in that moment. And that can feel really shitty. It's really unpleasant. And when nobody around you seems to suffer from the same thing, because at that moment you're suffering from it, then you
Yeah.
start to think, oh, it must be me. There must be something wrong with me. Because nobody, either if you try talking about it, people look at you like you've lost your marbles, and that doesn't feel confidence inspiring in yourself, or they don't want to talk about it. That also happens. They think, oh yeah, we don't talk about things like that. But it makes you feel very alone in it, and it doesn't feel like a gift in that moment at all. It feels quite horrible in that moment.
Yeah, it does. And, I think that that's unfortunately part of the reason that the mental health system labels people like us as crazy, right? Because they don't want to face the truth of it, that some of us have this sensitivity that others don't have, and we're perceiving things that others aren't perceiving. And at best it inspires a lack of confidence and an isolation. At worst, it causes suicide, it causes drug addiction, right?
Yeah.
When you feel broken and crazy, and when you feel very isolated in that feeling, and when you don't even feel that you can speak about it to the people around you, what do you think is going to happen, right? We, as
Yes.
humans, we're hardwired to seek comfort. And maybe that comfort looks like, too much use of your phone, or maybe that comfort looks like hard drugs and alcohol, right? And and it makes sense when it does. And I think that's why conversations like this are so important, because by
Mm.
normalizing what people are experiencing and saying that not only is it real and true, but you're not alone in it, and there are things that you can do to help and protect, and there's a perspective change you can take in regards to it being a curse versus a superpower. I think these conversations are really life-saving. I certainly know that, if I had known that about myself sooner, I would have suffered a hell of a lot less.
Yes, exactly. Because I think the first time that I wanted to commit suicide, I was 14.
Right.
And I remember being 18 and driving around on my bike, and I didn't even check if traffic was coming on in the intersection. I just drove over it. And I thought, if I get hit by a car and I die today, then that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
And I have had multiple moments of feeling this way. And I've also learned by diving into who I am and getting to know the ins and outs of my user manual that it's part of my shadow pattern. It's entropy, a feeling of numbness, a feeling of disconnect. And it was never that you actually want to die. It's not that you don't want to live. It's just that you don't want to keep on living this way, and you don't know how to stop it. You don't know how to change it. And I was my most of my childhood, I don't remember. And it feels like I had to draw it once. And I took a black crayon and I just started circling until the entire paper was black and in circles, and the crayon was gone. And then we had to name our drawing. And for me, the title of my drawing was The Big Black Hole of Gaping Despair.
Mm.
That basically sums up my childhood. And I felt misunderstood, incredibly alone. And if I thought, if this is going to be my life, then why bother? I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to live this way. So it's not that you actually want to die. It's just that you don't want to continue living this way, and you don't know what to do or how to change it. And I know there are lots of people that are feeling this way, and most of us, we don't talk about it. If my mom is watching this, I'm sorry, mom, we probably never spoke about this before. Because of many, many different reasons. There are also generational things going on. My mom comes from a family where you didn't talk about things like this. You didn't air your dirty laundry. For lots of generations, this was a very real thing. So if you learn by example, which children often do, and you learn by watching the behavior of your parents and you emulate it, whether or not that's conscious, yes or no, we learn these types of behavior. And being different from everybody else and not being able to talk about it is already very lonely. If you add trauma to it, especially lots of trauma, this only compounds the problem. And you start to feel like you're the only one in the world that is experiencing things like this. And nobody seems to understand you. Nobody seems to have similar things. And that further sort of confirms that there's something wrong with you.
Right, right.
And if you then seek help from it with a counselor or a therapist, most of them only work by the DSM book, the big book of what's psychologically wrong with you. That is, I think, why so many people who are either an empath or a highly sensitive person get misdiagnosed with things like bipolar, borderline syndrome, autism, ADHD, ADD, and I was very fortunate that in this country, psychologists cannot write prescriptions. So I had to go see a psychiatrist to get a prescription for the medicine that the psychologist wanted me on. And this psychiatrist said, I'm not writing any medicine for people I haven't spoken to in person. So I need to meet this person and I need to talk with her. So we met and we spoke and we talked, and he changed my life in a very, very positive way. He told me that I had gone through a lot and that the way to becoming who I really am was going to be a long journey, and that there was lots and lots of trauma that I still had to work through. That being said, he also told me that if he opens the book of the DSM and he starts looking at the symptoms of it, he said, from almost everything in this book, I have symptoms. It doesn't mean I have ADHD or I have autism or I am bipolar. It just means that I'm sharing characteristics with it, which is something completely different. And most people live by the book, are very literal, and their training doesn't allow for something that is not mentioned in the book. And being an empath, being a highly sensitive person for a long time was unknown. And because it's not something that's wrong with you, it's genetic, it's inherited, it's just who you are in your core foundation, it gets misdiagnosed and mistreated and mislabeled a lot. So if all the other things we talked about weren't enough, then when you try and get help for yourself, then often it gets even worse because they put a label on you that is not correct. Then they send you into therapy that is not helping you, further making you believe that there's something wrong with you because the thing that's supposed to help you is not doing anything. And then you start
Exactly.
doubting yourself, and it's not the road to recovery, it's the road down deeper. And then they medicate you if you're unlucky,
Yeah.
and you lose your personality and who you are completely.
I mean, we have the same story, Barbara. I was, what really contributed to my suicidality when I was 38 was the fact that I had done everything quote unquote right by mental health standards for 9 years. I'd been seeing the therapist weekly. I'd been taking all the different classes of medications, which, like you said, the side effects are worse than the disease and they make you a shell of who you are, right? I had done EMDR for trauma. I had done a partial hospitalization program, and yet none of it was helping. All of it was hurting. And I too had a psychiatrist really finally really listen to me, say, you've been through a shit ton. And I actually think your diagnosis isn't even in the book, which is complex PTSD. Right. So all of the things that you've talked about, the bipolar and the borderline and the autism and the ADHD, and these are all forms of neurodivergence, right? Well, complex trauma, a child that grows up in a gaping hole of despair, or however you described your childhood. And I very much relate to that. When you are surrounded or really steeped in cortisol and adrenaline at all times because your environment truly is not safe, then, and you're in your most your early years of development that are very vulnerable, well, then of course your nervous system doesn't even have the privilege of developing normally, right? So it's by definition neurodivergent. So the journey that you described of an empath, especially a traumatized empath, going into the traditional mental health system seeking help, more often than not, it's not helpful at all, because not only are they misdiagnosing you and putting labels on you and making you take medications and do things that help and hurt in many cases more than they help, they're also gaslighting you. They're gaslighting you and out of your true knowing that you do feel these sensitivities, that you do have these abilities and these gifts, whether they're validated by others or not, right? I mean, I had my
Yes.
first psychic experience when I was 6 years old. I correctly predicted that my brother would be severely injured 20 minutes or so before it happened. And when we got the call that he was injured, no one questioned how 6-year-old Kathleen knew that, right? All of the focus went to my brother's injury, and the complete, you know, lack of curiosity about how a 6-year-old could have possibly predicted the future, and really just kind of sweeping that under the rug and pretending like it didn't happen, that had truly profound impact, effects and impacts on me into my adulthood. And, as I said, really was the cause of my suicidality.
Yes, because these things probably already happened when you were a lot younger. I remember that my parents would give me money if I drank my milk, because milk was the white motor. That's how it was marketed here in this country, the white motor, meaning it fixes everything and it's always good for you and it makes for strong bones and good health. And now I'm diagnosed with severe lactose allergies,
Oh
right?
no.
And I
Geez.
never wanted to drink the milk, but they made me drink the milk. And I think I already knew that it wasn't good for my body. And
Right.
that's,
And,
it's,
and well, I was gonna say, I think that that's one of the main differences in, how I coach, and I'm sure how you coach your clients versus, how things are taught, or how people like us are typically treated in the mental health system, is we believe them. Right? We believe that they are actually perceiving what they're perceiving and experiencing what they're experiencing, and we don't try to take their autonomy away and literally gaslight them out of their own knowing. And that is a huge change from what's going on in the traditional mental health sphere. For the most part, people like us, I mean, unless you get that rogue psychiatrist who seems to really know what they're talking about, if they're traditionally trained, they are going to do a lot more harm than good when treating people like us.
for
And I
sure.
also want to say too, just because of what you said earlier about sharing so vulnerably about your own suicidal history, I've said that many times. It's not that I wanted to die. It's just that I did not know how to go on. I didn't understand how I could possibly live in the amount of pain that I was in. And the point I wanted to bring up is, for that reason, suicide is not selfish, right? That's one of the perspectives that really bugs me about about suicide, is that it's an act of selfishness, when in actuality, the person that actually goes through with that most likely has felt this way or had these thoughts for so long, right? It's not something that happens, once and then you make that decision. Um, it's something that's deeply thought about. And again, the conclusion is, I can't live like this, right? So, and that's another reason why conversations like this are so life-saving, because when people hear that they're not alone and that there are actually people out there that can not just relate but help coach them to a healthier way of being, my goal, definitely is suicide prevention.
One of my good friends committed suicide, and we didn't see it coming. We had sang karaoke Thursday evening, and we had lots of fun, and Saturday he committed suicide, and he was unsuccessful in his attempt, but he threw away the boxes. He took pills and he threw away the boxes, so they couldn't find what he took. So it still took a long time to revolve him and to revive him, and he had one of his muscles and nerves was pinched for a long time, so he came out of it with nerve damage and the inability to walk. And then your attempt didn't succeed, but there were so many things going on in that moment that I thought, oh God, why didn't you share how you were really feeling? Why didn't you ever talk about it? It was something that he probably suffered through, because we had long conversations about it afterwards, because I said these things to him. If I had only known, if you had given me any indication. And he said, I've been going through what I've been going through for so long, and I tried everything. He turns out to be diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he tried all of the medications in the book, and none of the medications were working. The voices in his head became louder and louder, and they were arguing so hard that he couldn't even have normal conversations with people anymore. He lost his business, he lost his girlfriend, he lost his house, he lost his income, he lost everything, until the moment where he thought, well, I tried every treatment out there that's there, and it's not going to get better than this. And he thought, I don't want to go on like this. It was also not that he wanted to die per se. He just didn't see a way out, a good way, a better way, a way that's worth living anymore. And that's indeed why it's so important to talk about it, because it's not, oh no, I'm done with today, so I'm now looking forward to tomorrow, so I'm going to end my life. You know, it's not that simple. It's not in the flash of a moment. There's a whole story there, a whole process there of deep unhappiness, probably isolation, and a giving up of sorts.
Yeah. Yeah. How's he doing now?
He is dead.
Oh,
Yes. He committed assisted suicide last year.
oh wow.
Yeah, or euthanasia, I think they call it nowadays, because he tried to live. So between, yeah, last year and the period before was 5 years, and he tried everything, and it was just not going anywhere, and nobody could do anything, and he just decided, but with all his friends and his family and the doctors and all the caregivers, and it came from a medical facility. It was really supported. So a whole different story than the first time, but yeah, it didn't have a happy ever after ending, unfortunately. That is also sometimes something that can happen, but when it's this being a misunderstood empath that mostly doesn't understand themselves, which I think is the core of the problem, because that other people don't understand you, huh, right? But when you don't understand yourself, that is the biggest issue. When you don't know who you are and how to work with who you are, and how things work for you, and how you work differently from most everybody else, and especially how to bridge the gap between how you work and how the world works.
Yeah. Yeah, because those opinions, like we've talked about, become, the voices of your parents and your caregivers and your bullies and even your doctors, right? Who are telling you that, there's something fundamentally wrong with you. That becomes the voice inside your head, right? And, and we don't ever know anything until we're taught it, right? So if you're never taught who you really are and what your real power is and what your real purpose is, and, it can get very easy to succumb to the popular narrative that, because even when you're mentioning that he was schizophrenic, to me, the word I would use is clairaudient, right? Like he was hearing energies or entities that were there. They just weren't visible to other people, right? And that's another form of giftedness that feels a hell of a lot like a curse. I think that one especially, because when you're clairaudient, that one is really quick to be labeled and medicated, and to sometimes absolutely tragic results.
Yes. Yes, and that's why it's so important to really get to know yourself, independent of other people's opinion, and form your own opinion about yourself, and make sure that you are in your truth. Nobody can tell you what your truth is besides you discovering it yourself. Nobody can tell you what type of person you are, or how you're meant to be living, or how you're meant to be feeling, or how you're meant to be operating. And even things that people find are the truth. The truth are just a set of facts that were true in a certain moment, but it doesn't mean that that set of facts is true for you. Or that it's true in a later moment, because for a long time the fact was that the earth was flat, and that if you sailed to the end of the ocean you would fall off it. That was the truth, and now it's no longer the truth. So it's basically an outdated set of facts that could be caught up by an updated set of facts, and that then change the truth, which technically, if we use those terms, is not possible, because there should only be one truth, and the truth is the truth. So the truth is not one thing, and I think everybody has their own version of the truth, and the real truth is somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's very interesting, because I actually view truth as another word for God, or the divine, or to me those words are similes.
Yeah,
What
similar.
word it is.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that the truth is, as far as I understand it, that we are spiritual beings having a human experience, right? And that we are eternal souls that never die, and that we come to this earth with specific intentions and specific lessons to learn. And, whether that lifetime is, by human terms, tragic or, triumphant, it's useful, right? There's a use to that experience. It's soul growth. And, I think the truth that we're really all seeking is self-love. I mean, the reality is we're all deserving of our love, our unconditional love, even. But the reality is most humans on the planet, especially anyone who succumbs to suicide or drug addictions or anything, lacks self-love big time, right? Because you would never hurt somebody you love,
No, but
right?
this is not what's taught in school, right? All the things that you mention are completely correct, but we don't learn this in school. We don't learn the fundamental basic truth that would save us a lot of suffering.
Yeah.
Instead, we continue with the rules, the bullshit rules of life, on how you're supposed to be acting, how you're supposed to be looking, how you're supposed to be doing, instead of really finding what is your specific truth. And I think that that's where you and I come in, where we help people to discover their specific truth and find their user manual. I call it your user manual, where you just learn everything about yourself and how you operate, and then how you operate into this world, and how to carve a life for yourself that brings you joy, instead
Yeah.
of being miserable at the hands of other people.
And that really is it, right? The definition of freedom in my book is when no one outside of you, or no circumstance outside of you, changes how you feel about yourself, right?
Yes.
That's when we're really free, when we're really sovereign, is when we stand in our truth, whatever's true for us, and we don't assert that on other people. We let them have their experience as well. And, we don't allow others' opinions of us. There's a saying that other people's opinions of you is none of your business.
Yes. And it is
Right?
true.
Yeah, that is true. If you want to live a life that feels good to you, then you have to, stop caring so much what other people say. Of course, we take into consideration what our loved ones, those who really truly care about us and have our best interests at heart, think. But even with those relationships, sometimes you have to say, I appreciate your concern or your perspective, but I know that what I'm doing is the right move for me because of how I feel on the inside, and nobody can determine that for you, right? No
No.
one can
Oh,
no one can
yes.
give you a map to where they're not going or they've never been, right?
Exactly. Yes, it's all uncharted area, and I think that that is also the biggest problem. Most of us are looking for answers and solutions outside of ourselves, while
Yeah.
the answer and the solution, in air quotes, is within yourself. Everything you need, everything you would want, everything you would desire comes from within you.
Yes. That is definitely my experience as well. And the trick seems to be that your mind or your ego self is also inside you. Right. So sometimes you have to really wade through the noise of what's not you. And as we've talked about, even the emotions or what are not yours in order to really, find yourself. And that happens over time. It happens in the process of really healing trauma, not just talking about trauma, but actually healing from the trauma. It comes from becoming very practiced in mindfulness techniques and stillness, right? Because we live in a world that's so hyper distractible for a reason,
Yes.
right? Because if everyone understood that their true power was within and that you have the ability to create any life, you have the ability to create whatever life you can imagine for yourself. So if your imagination is on things that are not wanted, right? And because of your past experiences, you've had a lot of practice with people not being who they say they are, or things not working out the way you thought they would, right? And if that's your only point of reference and those are the only thoughts that you can entertain on what's happened, then that's what you'll continue to create. But if you can actually release your mind from all of the trauma and all of the fear-based conditioning and all the voices that aren't you, and you can protect your energy and really protect your emotional landscape and what you're feeling and really get still, then you will find those answers.
Yes, exactly. Oh, I think this is a beautiful note to wrap up our time together. I've been really enjoying our talk, and I think this is so important to keep talking about because so many people are awakening and coming to themselves more and more. And these types of talks really inspire people and help people to find or discover who they really are. So, with that being said, if you are watching and if you are listening, I would love it if you could leave us a message in the comments. Either if you have a question, leave it, or maybe your biggest insight of today, or if you have a similar story, we would also love it if you would be willing to share it, because every story that we share helps other people to accept their life and their situation and move away from it. So that would be awesome. I can also imagine that you think, well, I love this topic and I really do need some help. So, where can I find this Kat? How can I meet her? So, if people wanted to reach out to you, Kat, where can they do that?
So the most important thing is to get the spelling of my last name right. There's no T in Schwarz. So it's Kat, KatSchwarz. And I have katschwarz.com. You can also visit coaching.katschwarz.com. And if you go to katschwarz.com, and join my mailing list, you'll get a free download of my 10 tips for, what do I call it? 10 life-saving tips that your mental health professional and religious leader have not told you. So there are, some good insights in there that are really against the traditional thinking when it comes to mental health and healing, and just to kind of get your, because one of the most important parts of healing that I don't know people talk about is changing your perspective, right? Because we're not able to change the things that have happened to us, but we can absolutely change our perspective on the things that have happened to us. And when we change the way we look at things or think about things, then the way we feel changes. And when how you feel changes, then your whole life changes.
For sure. Yes, I love that. I will make sure that everything Kat just mentioned is included in the show notes, including the spelling of her name and the links that she mentioned. So if you want to reach out to her, go to the show notes, probably below this video or maybe to the side, kind of depends on where you're catching this, but they will be there for sure. And if you want to reach out to me, then that is also possible. The links to contact me will also be included in the show notes. So don't hesitate to reach out to either one of us because you are not in this alone if you don't want to be. There is help out there. There are other people that have gone through similar things that understand and that can offer you the help that you need. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And for today, I really want to thank you, Kat. I think this was an amazing talk. I love your energy. I love what we talked about. And yeah, thank you.
Likewise, Barbara. It was so much fun to be with you, and I love your energy as well.
Thank you so much. For all of you, I wish you a really, really amazing rest of your day. And I look forward to inspiring you with another beautiful guest in next week's episode. For right now, have an amazing day and talk soon.